Hello, and welcome back to Refuge in Conversation with. I'm Sophie, and I use she, her pronouns. I'll be hosting today's episode, and I'm thrilled to be joined by Lise from Galop, who uses they, he pronouns. I work as a technology facilitated abuse lead within Refuge, and my role focuses on providing direct support to survivors of complex tech facilitated and economic abuse. I also work across the research and policy landscape in order to advocate for survivor-focused solutions. Our specialist tech and economic team saw a 92% increase in referrals in the 6 months of 2024 compared to the same period in 2019. And so it's more important than ever that we continue to keep tech abuse firmly on the agenda. Lise Harrington is the Training and Commercial Manager for Galop, the UK's LGBT plus anti-abuse charity. Presently, Lise educates professionals on their role in building a safer future for LGBT plus survivors of abuse and violence. He consults and educates on all areas of Galop's work, including hate crime, domestic abuse, sexual violence, and so-called conversion therapy. Before we get started, I do want to mention that today's episode will touch on some sensitive topics, including domestic abuse. If you're listening today and feel that you might need help with anything we've been discussing, there's support available. Here at Refuge, we run the National Domestic Abuse Helpline, which you can reach on 0808 2000 247. It's open 24 hours a day, every day of the year. We also have BSL interpreters available 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday to Friday. There is also a live chat service available on our website, although please do be mindful of whether you can access this from a safe device. Lise, thank you so much for joining me today. It's great to have you on the podcast. Would you mind first providing listeners with a bit of an overview of the work that Galop does?
Hey, Sophie, it's always so good to see you. So, Gallup works directly with thousands, and I think we're actually edging up to like tens of thousands of LGBT plus people that have experienced abuse and violence every year. We specialize in supporting victims and survivors of domestic abuse, sexual violence, hate crime, honor-based abuse, forced marriage, so-called conversion therapies, and other forms of interpersonal abuse. And we're a service run by LGBT plus people for LGBT plus people. And that also includes people who are questioning their identity. Nobody needs to have sort of landed in any one place to come and access support from Gallup. We really try to keep the needs of our community at the center of everything we do. So we support in a myriad of ways, but we run 4 national support helplines for LGBT plus victims and survivors of domestic abuse, hate crime, rape and sexual abuse, and so-called conversion therapy. The main helpline number is 0800 999 5428, and you can also visit our website at gallup.org.uk to access further support and resources. So we provide longer-term support to LGBT plus victims and survivors through our advocacy services. Those are person-centered, empowerment-based, and trauma-informed, meaning our advocacy focus is always on helping our clients decide what's best for them and then supporting them through their journey. We use what we learn working on the front lines with clients to work on national and local policy change, all to improve incomes for LGBT plus victims and survivors of abuse and violence. We build evidence through key pieces of research around LGBT plus people's experiences of abuse and violence, and push for legislative change, improved statutory guidance, and a better understanding of the needs of LGBT plus people across the country. So everything that I'm going to be talking about today, sharing today, comes from Gallup's really robust evidence base of providing support for over 40 years, the frontline trends that we're seeing now, the lived experience of our community, as well as our national LGBT plus specialist research. I know it's a lot, and yes, we are really busy.
Yeah, no, a lot on your plates over there, but thank you so much for sharing, Lise. It's really clear that Gallup do some incredibly valuable work, which really deserves to be spotlighted. So today's conversation will be focusing on how tech-facilitated abuse impacts on survivors from the LGBT plus community. This is a queer and trans voice discussion on how tech abuse can disproportionately impact marginalized members of our society. We want to really highlight some of the myths and stereotypes that we encounter in our work and think about how we can work together to tackle tech abuse. So, Lise, I first wanted to ask if you can outline some of the most harmful misconceptions around LGBT plus experiences of domestic abuse that you see in your work at Gallup.
Yeah, absolutely. So many of the stereotypes that we see are derived from a misunderstanding about both what abuse is and who, quote unquote, genuine victims and survivors are. To affirm, all abuse is about power and control, and any experience that a cisgender or heterosexual survivor could have, an LGBT plus survivor could have. The core difference is how a perpetrator or even multiple perpetrators might target someone's LGBT plus identity, the discrimination we can face, and prevent us from seeking help and support. These experiences can come from current or ex-intimate partners and or family members. One stereotype is that LGBT plus people have equal power in a relationship, so same-sex partner abuse is often mutual. To put it as simply as possible, there is nothing mutual, equal, or fair about intimate partner abuse. And although the abused partner may fight back, there's a big difference between violent resistance and abuse. LGBT plus experiences of abuse are often minimized under this stereotype. Abuse can be coded as guys being guys, roughhousing, a lover's quarrel, or a catfight between two women. These misconceptions can both stop agencies from recognizing LGBT plus abuse experiences, which lets the abuse continue, and also erasing LGBT plus survivors' experiences as well. Another that's really common is that the perpetrator in a relationship will always present as butch or be physically bigger or stronger, and the victim is always going to be femme and smaller and weaker. This stereotype really ignores the power and control factor of abuse. Partner abuse is not about size and strength or who looks masculine. Again, it's about that gaining of power and control over another person, regardless of how that person looks. The misconception can also come through really casually, even when you have friends who are responding to a disclosure by saying things like, well, you could take him, what's the issue? Or why didn't you just fight her off? She's tiny. Remarks like these can compound trauma and create self blame in a space that should really be safe. These stereotypes create shame for survivors overall, leaving them questioning why they couldn't stop the abuse, why they let it happen, have them doubt whether their experience even was abuse in the first place. Overall, everyday myths and stereotypes like these are going to impact the support available to LGBT plus people and even how LGBT plus people understand their own experiences. And this is particularly true when we're thinking about risk assessments and other processes in support agencies and how their challenges are coded by professionals. We've even seen cases come through Gallup where someone who is a survivor, but they have a more masculine gender expression or physically larger, are met with suspicion when they reach out for support from services. In some cases, they're even treated as the perpetrator or arrested themselves. Just to illustrate this, I wanted to share a quote from one survivor we worked with. They said, "I don't trust anyone. My family failed me, my teachers, the police, social services. I begged and begged for help and no one believed me." These myths and stereotypes have a significant impact on both LGBT plus survivors' perceptions of themselves as well as the way that professionals are able to recognize their experiences and connect them with the help that they really need. So I know that's only a couple of myths and stereotypes, but these are some of the ones we most commonly see in our work.
No, thank you, Lise. Those are all really important points. And I think it's really vital that we actually name and then contest these myths and stereotypes, as they can really hamper our ability to respond to domestic abuse effectively. And they can even amplify harm, as that really powerful quote you shared emphasizes. Within our team, we also see some misconceptions around tech abuse, which can have the same effect. The minimization of tech abuse is a theme that we encounter disappointingly frequently in our tech safety work. Sometimes there's a tendency to think of tech abuse as a less dangerous form of abuse. For example, we quite regularly come across the idea that if stalking is tech facilitated, then it doesn't carry that same level of risk. When in reality, technology has just made it that much easier to stalk someone. It may now be the case that a perpetrator doesn't need to follow someone by lurking in dark shadows on street corners. They can now track someone with really pinpoint accuracy from the comfort of their own home. They can also often access survivors' online accounts or even install stalkerware on their phone. And these insidious behaviors mean that a perpetrator can have access to a wealth of information about a survivor, which can then compound the obsessive fixations that we see here. Stalking is a high-risk behavior, regardless of how it occurs. The evidence clearly shows us, that the minimization of online stalking can have catastrophic consequences. We've seen some high-profile domestic abuse-related deaths in which tech abuse was a significant contributing factor. Within our team, we know that tech abuse can directly increase the risk of serious harm. For example, location tracking via tech can enable perpetrators to track victims down to a new safe address or even to refuges, providing them with direct access to survivors who have fled abuse. Statistically, in an intimate partner context, a lot of us will be familiar with the fact that the time a victim of abuse is separating from their abuser is the time that risk of murder is highest. We also see some similar victim blaming narratives occurring within the context of tech abuse. For example, we see victims being blamed for intimate image abuse perpetrated against them, when in reality, sharing or threatening to share even an intimate image of someone else is a crime. And there is never anyone to be blamed but a perpetrator. There's no excuses for intimate image abuse. We also see survivors being blamed for their own use of technology, and this can often be reflected in those solutions that are being offered to survivors by some professionals to simply come offline. Firstly, coming offline hardly means that domestic abuse will automatically stop. And secondly, so much of our lives these days is online that it really is virtually impossible. Survivors of tech abuse should be free to use tech just like anyone else. And it is up to us as professionals to empower survivors to use tech safely wherever possible. Automatically telling survivors to come offline when they disclose tech abuse only compounds isolation, which is already a huge issue for those experiencing domestic abuse. Please, are you able to share some of the key themes which you encounter when supporting LGBT plus survivors of tech abuse?
Yes, absolutely. There's so much I could say on this, so I'm just going to share a few examples. Again, anything that could be classed as sort of the standard experience of tech abuse can also be experienced by LGBT plus people, but these are some of the additional themes. I guess firstly, I want to reemphasize your point about the solutions offered to tech abuse really being about getting off the platform, remove yourself from the app, get away from tech and digital spaces. But one of the additional issues for LGBT plus people in this is that many of them are in rural areas facing enormous barriers to connecting with others in the community or accessing specialist services that can help them. It's not reasonable to ask people to remove these lifelines, especially when they're isolated. There needs to be an understanding that some of these spaces are essential for LGBT plus people's survival, and context is really important in terms of how we safeguard different communities. The intersection as well between hate crime and domestic abuse isn't widely understood or very well incorporated into available systems. It's important to remember that anti-LGBT plus hate or the facilitation of hate from others is a tool of power and control that perpetrators of tech abuse can and do engage in. This could show up as perpetrators doxing their current or ex-partners to facilitate anti-LGBT plus hate against them, trying to make them feel more afraid and harm their well-being, mental health, or sometimes even make them lose employment. Doxing, just for everyone listening and for reference, is the action or process of searching for and publishing private or identifying information about a particular individual or group of individuals on the internet with malicious intent. So this could look like an ex-partner posting pre-transition photos of someone online along with their personal details like place of work, phone number, address to facilitate hate against them. It could be threatening to out someone using nude images of them or other personal details which could damage their relationship with community, education, employment, and just overall be incredibly violating to lose control over your process of coming out. Again, like you were saying, Sophie, these experiences are so often minimized because they've taken place online. But we know that the impact of these experiences extends so far outside of that space. Having an intrinsic part of you being hated on by potentially thousands of strangers at once is terrifying. Even in a digital context, these experiences can be just as high risk. We've also seen anecdotally on the front line perpetrators even citing fears over the increased level of hate crime as an excuse to engage in further tracking and control over a victim's digital presence. People are justifying needing to know where others are 24 hours a day sometimes because of the clearly documented escalations in anti-LGBT plus hate the last few years. But this isn't a reason to control and monitor someone. As well, we know most tech companies are not engaging with LGBT plus anti-abuse organizations prior to launching new features or designing their apps or programs, which means that we see new advancements related to access and convenience, which create new risks and challenges all the time, especially since very rarely is an LGBT plus lens applied to tech development and definitely not an LGBT plus anti-violence lens.
Thank you, Lise. These are certainly all issues that we need to see increased awareness of. And based upon the vital work of organisations like Gallup, we also know that LGBT plus survivors can often face additional barriers to seeking support. And so we need to be vigilant in responding to risk factors which may intensify harms. So, for instance, alongside the already incredibly damaging impact of intimate image abuse, we see that this may be accompanied by the risk of outing for LGBT plus survivors, as you touched upon. An LGBT plus survivor may also be more likely to experience familial abuse or abuses committed by multiple perpetrators, which can also intensify associated harms. So therefore, professionals really need to heed your advice, Lise, and the advice from organisations like Gallup. You outline a really broad spectrum of concerns, and it's all informed by rigorous learning from theory and practice. So for that reason, I would actually say that a podcast episode like today's is an excellent starting point for a professional wishing to build upon whatever foundation of knowledge they may have around LGBT plus experiences of tech abuse. Another thing I would say is central to the work of our team is ensuring that our approach to domestic abuse is really intersectional. There is a wealth of experience within and outside of the domestic abuse sector about how different aspects of a survivor's identity can impact their experiences of abuse and the support which they can then subsequently access. This might include a survivor's gender identity, sexuality, race, religion, immigration status, age, disability status, the list goes on. But what is crucial is that we recognize that people and their identities are complex. These various facets of identity are often interwoven for a survivor, and their experiences can look completely different as a result. Tackling tech abuse through a myopic lens is a trap we're really keen to avoid. Lise, could you elaborate on some of the ways in which professionals can ensure that an LGBT plus survivor's identity is recognised and respected in order to enable them to receive the person-centred support, which everyone needs?
Absolutely. So firstly, risk is not distributed equally amongst all LGBT plus people. Like you say, Sophie, there's so many aspects to someone's identity and positionality, lived experience, and abuse can have an impact on all of them. Professionals must be person-centered when approaching their LGBT plus support. We've often seen services homogenizing LGBT plus people to a uniform group. But if a service only centers white, able-bodied, English-speaking, middle-aged LGBT plus people with secure immigration status in their responses and development, then they're only going to be able to help the most privileged members of our community, and also they're likely excluding or erasing the experiences of everyone outside of that very privileged group. There are also distinct stereotypes about who is LGBT plus or who we'd be more likely to think of as LGBT plus. These stereotypes often impact older LGBT plus people or people of certain ethnicities. In particular, it's worth noting that when we're talking about ethnicity and race, there are often racist stereotypes about which communities are more likely to be perpetrators of abuse against the LGBT plus community, which there's no evidence base reflecting this. It's very much a racist stereotype. I think as professionals, it's important to come back to the understanding that if LGBT plus people cannot be safely out with you, then the risk that they're facing cannot be assessed accurately. And it's your job as a professional to ensure that you're a trustworthy and safe space for them to be themselves, in all the different aspects of themselves, not just their orientation and gender identity. Recognizing the intersectional barriers at both a structural and interpersonal level is critical to reducing barriers and considering if an LGBT plus person could safely access your support. For instance, if there are risks in the digital spaces you're facilitating, or even how someone with anti-LGBT plus prejudice could manipulate your tech to create harm.
I think you've really struck right at the heart of the issue there, which is that we really need to understand all those nuances of domestic abuse and the ways in which it affects people differently as individuals. Certainly, I think within our team, we see that different people can also use technology in different ways. And this then affects the kind of support we need to provide to a victim of tech abuse. So, for instance, there are some adaptive or health focused technologies which can be used to support those with disabilities, and they can be a lifeline to many people. But on the other side of the coin, that also means that some disabled people experience unique forms of tech abuse. For example, with a perpetrator withholding devices which enable a survivor to navigate effectively or to communicate with others. And that's just one example of many. I think you're also absolutely right, Lise, that we need to understand the negative implications of homogenizing any group, including LGBT plus survivors. I think it feeds into why it's so important to adequately fund domestic abuse services. In order to properly gauge that risk, professionals need time, training, the energy, and the space to understand their clients as individual people. Of course, we have to be informed by relevant research and learning from past experience, but we also need to be mindful that we always focus on the person in front of us when we're providing effective domestic abuse support and advocacy. So, shifting the focus a little again, I want to highlight another strategic priority within the tech abuse team. So, we are constantly evaluating real time risks and forms of abuse, but we really can't stop there. Technology is constantly developing, and with all this frenzied innovation, we are bombarded with new products and platforms from all directions, it seems. And I think, as we've touched upon, these can revolutionize aspects of our lives for the better. Tech has led to countless advances in education, healthcare, entertainment, to name a few. And it's also facilitated a lot of positive activism, including in the LGBT plus space. Our goal as a team is really never to diminish those positive contributions of technology to society at large. But unfortunately, we can't avoid the fact that technology is a double edged sword. There's a seemingly inevitable dark side to the continual advancement of tech. And part of this is tech abuse. The ways in which domestic abuse can be facilitated are always evolving. And so our approach to it has to evolve as well. And as a result, we really work to anticipate emerging trends in tech abuse so that we can work more proactively and ensure that we can offer that better quality support to survivors. So, on that note, Lise, are there any concerns which you anticipate will grow in prevalence and in impact for LGBT plus survivors of tech abuse over the next few years?
Yeah, there's a few things that we don't have a great evidence base for yet, but we're sort of keeping our eyes on. So already we're anecdotally seeing the damaging use of AI to incite hate against LGBT plus people. And AI has great elements, but the misuse of it to facilitate this kind of hate, as well as sexual violence and domestic abuse, is really concerning. We're seeing people manipulate health tech apps in order to manipulate people's medication, creating both mental and physical challenges for LGBT plus people. Health tech is one of our biggest concerns, and we don't have enough research or big enough evidence base for this yet, but it's something we're mindful of and we're keeping an eye on what's emerging in this area. If any listeners would like to fund that research, please get in touch. We'd like to see more information come out about it. Um, Going forward, I think as we center efficiency and convenience in our lives and our tech, we need to think about who it benefits. If private information, tracking data, or even making long-term commitments or decisions becomes much easier to access via tech, then we need to consider how a perpetrator of violence and abuse could potentially use that?
Yes, I would echo that. And I think there's certainly a fair few reasons to feel uneasy about advances in AI in particular from a tech abuse standpoint. Within our team, we are already beginning to see deepfake technology being used to perpetrate sexual abuse. And there is unfortunately quite broad scope for its use in perpetrating identity based abuse more broadly, for trans survivors in particular. Again, the health apps really starkly illustrate the ways in which tech can facilitate positive developments in healthcare, as well as some really worrying changes. And we can also expect to see new forms of social media, new ways to facilitate online hate and doxing. And so we need to remain focused on what may be likely just around the corner. I now want to move the conversation on slightly in our final segment, as I think these discussions can feel pretty bleak at times. We're constantly reckoning with all these seemingly endless ways in which domestic abuse can be perpetrated and the devastating impact that that can have on people's lives. So it is overwhelming to think about how we begin to tackle that. Lise, you have already provided some much needed insight into how our work can remain more forward looking and solution focused. What ongoing practices or changes would you like to see across the sector in order to promote the provision of better quality support for LGBT plus survivors of domestic abuse?
Oh, so many things. So to start off, I think I'd like to see the tech sector incorporating an LGBT plus specialist lens at the point of creation and designing support, rather than doing all of the work, creating all those systems, and then inviting a specialist organization like Galop in afterward. I'd also like more organizations and individuals to access LGBT plus specialist anti-violence training, education, and just create a wider lens of abuse that incorporates an intersectional understanding of LGBT plus survivor experiences. Training and education, it sounds simple, but it's really a sustainable way to develop your services and your tech in a really just a much more inclusive way. All of this includes just being mindful of risks when you're building tech. And if you feel like you can't recognize what those may be, speak to LGBT plus specialists. We're never going to erase all of the risks that exist in tech, but we should be informed by them and prepared to respond to them in a meaningful way. The size of these challenges doesn't mean we should stop trying, and we need to think creatively and not face it alone. I think if we're going to talk about working intersectionally, there's also an element of collaboration in that and how we work with each other, which leads me to my next point about building reciprocal relationships. The Tech Abuse partnership between Gallup and Refuge Tech Abuse team is a great example of this. I have felt throughout this entire collaboration that there's been a real foundation of mutual respect. Both of our teams delivered training to each other, even though there's so much overlap in what we do. And I think that we've managed to upskill staff at both organizations just feel more confident. Fundamentally, have referral relationships with LGBT plus specialist organizations. Have a plan when a queer or trans client comes through your services and consider their needs before they're in front of you. So you don't have to panic when they're thinking about what to do next. Remember, LGBT plus survivors also aren't just clients or service users. Um, they're going to be colleagues too, who need you to consider their needs as well.
Yeah, thank you, Lise. I think you've touched upon some of the most essential guidance for the relevant sectors and individuals to consider there. And I think a lot of your points actually mirror some of the most central tenets of our work within the tech team as well. Because we also always want to promote safety by design and to encourage tech companies and social media platforms to consider those risks from the outset. And this is what will enable society to proactively limit those ways in which perpetrators can misuse products and online accounts. We also continue to advocate for significant legislative changes, which was why Refuge did so much work to push for positive changes to the Online Safety Act prior to it becoming law, and why we now continue to fight to see those changes implemented as quickly and meaningfully as possible. I should probably also say that in light of the recent and very disappointing autumn budget, Refuge continues to call for that specialist funding of services responding to tech abuse. We also see immense value in specialist training in the same way that you do, Lise, and that Gallup does. And so we also provide this to professionals across the country. No one sector can work towards ending tech abuse or domestic abuse at large, even, which is why we place so much emphasis on bringing different professionals together and promoting genuine collaborative efforts. We did so recently, and that was at our first Tech Safety Summit, which is hopefully the first of many. This brought a huge range of different professionals together from across sectors, and Lise was actually one of our brilliant speakers at the summit. So we need to foster a culture of shared learning and innovation in order to pursue that really solution-focused thinking. Spotlighting the expertise of organizations such as Gallup is absolutely integral in improving support for LGBT plus survivors. Our tech partnership with Gallup, I would say, has enabled those positive changes you mentioned, Lise, in both our team's capacities to deliver that specialist support. We've facilitated consultation sessions to understand the experiences of survivors from the LGBT plus community when it comes to tech abuse. We then use that information to put together and deliver training packages, host tri-weekly tech champion calls, and create guides and webinars for our colleagues at Gallup. Finally, I would say that at the heart of both our organizations' work is listening to the survivors that we support and ensuring that their voices are reflected in everything that we do and everything that we advocate for. In this way, we work to tailor an approach that is consistently informed by both evidence and empathy. So, Lise, do you have any final thoughts to share with listeners about where they can go from here?
Yes, I do.
Mhm.
So I just want to leave with a couple pieces of best practice and a couple options for support going forward. So one, which is quite exciting, and I think by the time this comes out, this will likely be one of the first spaces that we're talking about this, but Gallup is launching a new digital course platform so that people can learn about LGBT plus experiences of abuse and violence online independently in 2025, really to help anyone as an individual who wants to start their learning journey on these topics. Also, we're here. We want to collaborate with you. We want to educate everyone on these topics. So please be in touch. We're really happy to help in any way that we can to make things more inclusive and safer for LGBT plus survivors. One small point is that risk is not a threat to innovation, but really, like you said, Sophie, it's safety-led design. And it doesn't stop innovation. It doesn't make it less valuable. It just makes it more accessible and inclusive for people who are facing a lot of different risks in the world right now. I would also say that don't just email LGBT plus organizations with your one-off questions. You're allowed to reach out, but engage in meaningful collaborative relationships which value everyone's time and expertise. Ultimately, I think conversations like the one we're having now, Sophie, really do reflect the need for more of this type of collaboration because I feel like both of our organizations have gotten so much out of it.
100%. I couldn't agree more. And I actually think despite the scale of the challenge that's facing us today, this conversation has been really thought-provoking, but should also inspire quite a bit of optimism as well. You know, the solutions are there if we work towards them. And I think it's a brilliant note to end on. So thank you so much for your time today, Lise, and for bringing so much expertise and compassion, as always, to a conversation which focuses on some really challenging subject matter. And to the listeners, I hope you have found today's episode as interesting as I have. Thank you for listening, and until next time, take care.
Take care.